So my name's Joel Robinson. Born and bred in Wellington, New Zealand. My experience with Pioneers was when I was 18, I went overseas to South Sudan for 11 months and was using football as a means of cross-cultural mission with mainly with youth. So we were helping to, I was coaching a team of young guys and also helping to organise tournaments for youth playing football, really as a means of breaking down some of those barriers that you could often have with working cross-tribally in South Sudan. So I was 18 when I went. That was in 2012. So quite an amazing experience there, and experiencing different parts of a very different culture to New Zealand. Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's a particular time that I remember, it wasn't like a sort of lightning kind of moment, but I remember when I was in, it must have been early years of college, even intermediate years, I felt quite a particular calling to Africa in general. It's very generic because there are about 40, 50 countries in Africa. And it, for some reason, with different things, it really kind of stood out to me. Like, when it was mentioned in movies or came up in ads, it was just like an extra sense of a drawing, really, to go there. And as over time, as I got a bit older and really considered what this might look like with where this fits in my life, it became quite apparent actually that it was quite an opportunity, quite a great fit really to do that straight after finishing high school, before jumping into university. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to study, and the fit seemed like quite a good one. And I met Pioneers. It was Jay Martinga at the time at Parachute Music Festival and Missions tent there, and got talking. And basically Pioneers was the only organisation that would send or would consider sending an 18-year-old to Africa. Everywhere else was kind of like a sort of package kind of thing. You go here for a set period of time doing this, but football was always on my heart, and music as well, and Africa. And Pioneers was able to talk to the area leader for, I think it was both of Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, or whoever it was at the time, and they came back this football program in South Sudan, using football as a ministry, working with youth intertribally, building connections and trying to break down barriers. And prayed over that and just had a piece about going. And next thing I knew, about 10 months later, I was on a plane heading to Kenya at first, to Nairobi. And just had a real piece about going, and so here I am now. Yeah. They had any connection? I mean, my grandparents on my mother's side had served, had spent time, I believe it was in the Solomons, and had done that when, I think it must have been when they were in their 50s, or, I'm pretty sure it was their 50s or early 60s. And that was quite an impactful thing for them. My mum had also done, I think it was a year with Operation Mobilisation primarily in Israel, when she was in her early 20s. So in a small way, actually, to think of it, even on the other side of the family, my grandmother grew up in India. Her parents were missionaries there. So, I guess there is a bit of a thing in the blood for missions, but I don't know if it was really ever something that was kind of particularly highlighted or talked about that much as an option. It was, but perhaps it was. I guess it must have been, if it was something that really ended up being on my mind years later. It was, yeah. I mean, that was my pathway really into mission. All the other organisations I talked to, yeah, it was the sort of package deal of you go here and build this generally for sort of 6 weeks or 8 weeks. There wasn't kind of much option for someone wanting to commit a whole year. I don't know what the landscape's like now, but it was very difficult. But there was a relationship really there from the start, and a willingness to explore and see what the possibilities were. And then the only obstacle was then having to go and do raising the funds to be able to get there. So yeah, it was quite refreshing, to be honest, and really encouraging. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, in going, yeah, I mean, people were really generous and supporting. There were a number of people at church that really got behind me going. I think for a lot of people, it was quite a shocking thing. 18-year-old heading to kind of the middle of nowhere, one of the poorest nations on earth, and one of the newest nations on earth as well. But yeah, there were people, at the time our church had a bunch of trees that were needing to be cut down. And so all of the firewood that they sold off as part of that, I think the proceeds from that were split between me and someone else who was going on missions as well, which was just a real blessing. Family were a real blessing as well, and support. Even those that weren't necessarily big behind missions, or that might not have been in the best place in their walk with Jesus. But yeah, it was quite actually surprising. Being younger at the time, I wasn't super involved in the sort of day-to-day looking at how much was there, but I know Mum in particular was really blown away by the support. So yeah, I mean, there was definitely huge provision there in first getting there, and actually just having the support while there. So that definitely was quite an amazing thing, yeah. That's a good question. Some of the most, I mean, in going, I really wanted to be useful, wanted to have an impact. I think when going on mission, it's easier to have really grandiose ideas of what you're going to do and achieve, and especially in a culture that is very takes a long time to build relationships and to build trust and to have, I guess, credibility in a sense, or mana really. The amount that you could realistically probably achieve in a year is somewhat limited. But yeah, so I really wanted to have some form of impact, not to just kind of be there to be the sort of elevated missionary, or to kind of just have a holiday. I wanted it to be more than that. I mean, people don't go to South Sudan for a holiday for starters, really, at least not these days. But yeah, it was that was a key thing on my heart, and one of the really particularly meaningful times or moments was because basically pretty much all boys were pretty football mad in South Sudan, irrespective of their ability. Some were quite talented, and if you gave them the right training and equipment, there are guys there that would be able to play professional level for sure. But then there are also some, as with every country, that perhaps they're not the most physically gifted, a bit just uncoordinated. And there was one kid in particular who I remember got made fun of a bit because he was quite a gangly guy, wasn't the most coordinated, super passionate about football, absolutely loved it, breathed it. And I had the opportunity to be kind of training him as part of this team. And I remember when we were playing a game in this tournament that we had organised, and I was coaching a team as well, I remember subbing him onto the field and virtually the whole crowd laughing at this guy. And I felt so sorry. I mean, these are people, these are guys that have hope for very little, and they're always very careful with how they would treat each other's hope for things. And to be, at the best of times, even if you're someone that has it all going for you, if everyone that in an arena or everyone around you to be like laughing at you when you're not making a joke, or intentionally making fun of yourself, that's a hard thing for anyone to take, let alone someone that has very little. And it really, to be honest, it angered me really. So it became a key thing really for me to encourage all the guys that I was training to actually focus on. That was one of the aims really, is to be focused on not isolating each other and actually coming together and working together. And so I really, I think I scolded them, about not making fun of their teammates, supporting their teammates because they're a team and they needed to be working together. And for whatever reason, there was a time, a couple of months, I think, in length between when I had been training these guys and had there hadn't been funding, I think, to actually run some of the tournaments we were wanting to run, and a couple of months later came back to coaching these guys to run something, and to see him like being included and being an active part of the team was in some ways a small thing, but it was a hugely meaningful thing to me, and at least it kind of felt in some ways like getting far more out of it than you end up giving, even though that's never your intent in going. But that was at least one small thing that felt like actually me being here had some sense of worth or purpose. That was kind of the first, I guess, major moment that I felt that. So that was, in a long-winded way, a very meaningful moment for me, yeah. I saw it there where people were laughed at or looked at as freaks, really, because of their disabilities. I mean, I distinctly remember seeing an albino guy, and that's seeing an albino African, especially in South Sudan, who are, I think scientifically, they are the blackest people on earth. Their skin pigment is the darkest of any ethnic group on earth, as far as I understand. For someone to be like whiter than me, it's pretty jarring, really, to what you've been. There are very few other Westerners around, really. I was mostly around South Sudanese, so it was quite an unexpected thing. But I think this, this guy and certainly others with disabilities, unfortunately for many of them, it was, they were pretty socially isolated because of their differences. So I arrived into Nairobi, I think it was sort of mid-Jan, and I left early December. So, near on 11 months, yeah. Enough of a length of time to really be there mentally, because I think if it's really short, you kind of become not that invested because you're kind of perhaps in a state of mind of kind of just getting by. And you'd kind of see that with some of the really short-term groups that would come through with different organisations. Great experience, but there's not the same sort of mental investment. 11 months, even at the same time, is still, again, not the same, complete level of mental investment as someone that's going intending to be there for 5 years or more, or foreseeable future. And I certainly spent a lot of time with people that had been there already for a long period of time, and as far as I know, are still there. But it's enough time to really have your eyes opened, I think, to what a different world a large part, if not the most of the rest of the world is like, really, compared to what it is like here in New Zealand and the abundant riches, really, that we have. Well, from a health perspective, I contracted malaria while I was there. That was not particularly fun. I mean, it's kind of pathetic in some ways, having had it once, whereas many, local people there would, as they're a child, they'd get it on the way back from school. They'd be basically, vomiting. They'd fall asleep in the ditch and then continue walking home. I mean, unfathomable really for most of us. We'd call that a health crime. But that was kind of daily life for a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, getting malaria wasn't something I was super fearful about. But it was pretty taxing. Quite a odd experience, really. Was very grateful for this hospital that was running in the area. I can't remember if Catherine was there at the time when I went through this. I can't remember if it was before or after she'd arrived in South Sudan. But it was a hospital for women and children primarily, run by harvesters. And I ended up spending I think it was a couple of nights there. I lost quite a lot of weight in my first couple of months in South Sudan, and especially after that. But yeah, I mean, it was amazing having other missionaries around that were really involved in that area and treated that sort of stuff every day. I mean, in some ways you're around far more expertise than you would be if you're in New Zealand, because these are people that, treating this literally every day. So yeah, it was certainly a challenge and a slow recovery, but not one that was, I guess too much of a challenge to deal with in the grand scheme of things. I think other difficulties you find and I think this is true of a lot of Africa and a lot of other countries around the world, especially hot climate cultures, is this very slow pace of life. You're on one hand very mindful that people have been essentially spending a whole lot of money to get you there and support you while you're there, and there being some very slow days where you're not really achieving much. Certainly when you compare it to the modern sort of need to be ticking multiple things off in a day. So that really slow pace of life in comparison was really tough to get used to and to adjust to, and I think it was highlighted by just travel. There were such poor roads, no asphalted roads, no concreted roads for the majority of the country. And at one point we travelled about 260 kilometres, and it took I think like 11 hours to travel that distance. If you're going, averaging 30 kilometres an hour for that long on very bumpy roads like corrugated iron kind of thing, that tests your patience. Which is probably really good for me, because naturally I think for most of my life patience is something I've struggled with, so yeah, you couldn't hide from it. For sure. Language barriers, having to adjust my accent significantly. I think my accent probably to a degree forever changed. It's New Zealand accent. The New Zealand accent is a very grating, very difficult accent for I think many cultures around the world. So yeah, when it came to team talks, if anyone was to listen in to my team talks, they'd probably, I think many people probably label as offensive or something. The way I had to kind of really change my accent in order to be understood. It was quite funny watching back or listening back to some of those sort of halftime team talks, or how I spoke in training, but just a reality of life, really, necessity. But yeah, it did require a lot of patience. Yeah, I think the timing of when I was there, South Sudan in 2011 gained independence from Sudan, and they were kind of still in really a phase of celebration in a way of independence. As a country that has since then, I think, fighting really erupted again in sort of 2014. So the time that I was there was in a fortuitously very safe time, and where I was predominantly very safe. I mean, there were unexploded landmines basically all around the country, and never had any issues. So I really was thankful for safety there. My mum actually came with me, which, to be honest, if she hadn't, I wouldn't have probably lasted as long as I did. She was there for 7 months. There was one crazy incident where she got arrested by South Sudanese secret police and accused of being a British spy, which didn't make sense on a whole lot of levels. She was taking photos with a phone that didn't have a camera and all sorts. And just that whole circumstance was crazy. But yeah, and I wasn't even actually with her for it. I was back at the room that I was staying in. But yeah, I mean, the way that God provided in calming that whole situation down, and her being released from actually having been put in a cell for a few hours, was really God's provision. But yeah, apart from that, there were very few times where I really felt like a real insecurity or real sense of danger. But yeah, I mean, a big part of it was down to being blessed, with the time that that God had us there for. Yeah. It would have been, yeah. Although the whole thing kind of happened so quick. It happened on a day of, it was, I think it was actually they're celebrating their first year of independence on that day of celebrating. And I'd been, I can't remember why, but I was too drained. I was doing a lot of language learning, and that really, when you're doing one-on-one language learning for sort of 2 hours, it really takes it out of you. And I think, for whatever reason, I'd just chosen to go back to sleep in bed. And so, yeah, she had headed on down to this event. And then the next thing I knew, she was coming back telling me about she'd been arrested by South Sudanese secret police. So unfortunately, I don't have a story quite as cool as that. But it was quite an experience. Yeah, it's interesting. There are so many things about my time having spent those months overseas with pioneers that were used in ways that I wouldn't have expected. You go earnestly with a heart of wanting to serve and not wanting to get the things out of it for yourself. But every time I'd ever gone for a job interview, having on your CV that you spent 11 months as a volunteer in South Sudan, people always want to talk about that because it's pretty unusual for anyone really. Like, I haven't met anyone else really that's perhaps quite had the same experience. So provided quite a big advantage when looking for work, when back and following having finished study, which was quite odd. Hadn't expected, but it really also opened my eyes to a love of cultures, a love of I guess doing things with international focus. So it really informed my study. I ended up studying international business as one of my majors at university, and in a kind of weird indirect way, it's probably the reason, or a big by extension, a big reason for having how I met my wife, which was ultimately because I studied international business. And I think perhaps that love of living cross-culturally or working cross-culturally led me to a cross-cultural marriage. So, yeah, it really has blessed me, and even just in challenging thinking, or trying to always have a perspective of things bigger than just myself, or having an appreciation for really how good we've got it. I think if you learn to cope and live with very little without flushing water, even if it's for, a short period of time relatively, that changes your perspective, and it changes your, I guess, your willingness to be able to let go of certain things, to not cling to things that aren't more important than our relationship with Jesus. So, yeah, I think those are probably some of the main ways. Yeah, well, that connection. So I didn't stay didn't stay super connected with Pioneers instantly after returning. So Charles and Rosalie came on board as sort of interim directors for a period of time, and they organised some a gathering of sort of ex Pioneers field workers, and that must have been a few years after I got back, I think. And so kind of joined as part of that, and had sort of still like a bit of a loose connection with Pioneers through whenever those sorts of get-togethers happened. But then Chris came on board as director, and it must have been I think a year or two after he came on board as director, and we'd caught up a few times and had introduced him to my wife, to Tammy, and he began discussing the possibility of serving through helping on the board. And so it's now been just over 3 years of serving on the board, which has been a really cool way to still be engaged with mission. I still have a heart for mission, even though right at this period of time, God's call isn't for me to be on the overseas mission field, but a way to connect some of the, I guess, what I do day to day with Pioneers. And it's cool to still be even only though even though the only snippets, I guess, of stories, you're still hearing of what it is that people are involved with on the mission field, and so that's quite neat. It's a really cool aspect. Yeah, I mean, tough to nail down a specific piece of scripture. I mean, there was a lot of time for reading because there were a lot of slow times there. So I'm sure that there are significant scriptures now that I see as part of daily life that probably kind of became more apparent then, but I don't know that I could really pick out which some of the specific ones. I do specifically remember from time to time on some of the music we'd sing, actually. There was every morning we'd do like a sort of devotional and time of singing in Juba Arabic, which is the sort of local dialect of Arabic. And there are a couple of songs I can still remember the tune from and most of the words to. And I still have the music book with all the songs in there. So that'd be really neat sometime to go back to that. But book-wise, I think, two books in particular that really were very useful early in my time there in expanding my thinking was one, When Helping Hurts, which deals a lot with, it's perhaps fairly well known probably within the Pioneers community. I think it was someone within Pioneers or Pioneers UK or something who gave it to us at the time. But yeah, just really challenging, I guess, the notion that on how encouraging people to think more deeply about how to effectively help, not just throwing money at the problem, which sometimes can really create some cycles of dependency and end up actually doing a bit of harm. And the second would have been Foreign to Familiar, which is a book that a group I'm pretty sure when I was there, a group that was from another organisation actually were running some training around working cross-culturally, and they use this as well. But yeah, really interesting seeing some of the commonalities across different cultures, as well as those clear differences. And South Sudan and New Zealand operate with some, or at least NZ European and New Zealand operate to some very different values and thinking. So yeah, they were very significant in gaining more of an ability to operate there effectively, and continue to, I think, help me in cross-cultural relationships back in New Zealand as well, because we're a very, very multicultural country. It can be very easy to overread into people's actions, their thinking, but you can easily have two people come to quite different outcomes in terms of how they act, based on how they assess whatever that thing is, or what a normal response is, or what a loving response is. There are some clear-cut things, but then there's some that are very open to interpretation. So, yeah, understanding the cultural context that you're operating in, very, very important to be effective. I think it can be very easy for the West to fall into a mindset of development is mission. And the thing we continually need to remind ourselves is that making people, economically or financially more well off is not necessarily going to make people spiritually well off. And in fact, I'd argue in many cases it probably does the opposite, because it encourages people to put their reliance on the physical rather than on the spiritual. And for some people, the challenge might be they have already their reliance on the spiritual, but it's the wrong spiritual, as you'd often see in a lot of poorer countries where there is maybe a poverty in wealth, but not a poverty in faith. But yeah, encouraging people to put their reliance on the rock rather than on the local witch doctor or other spiritual beliefs, other held beliefs. But very important in my view, and something I really came away with from my time there is to not overvalue economic development, because that can quite easily become a god in of itself. One thing in particular, I'd always thought that I'd probably go back and visit again, whether it would be for a longer period of time or not. And I could have probably made a choice at some point to have gone a different path, and to have gone back. But at no point has there been a clear sense that actually that's what God was calling me to do. And yeah, as much as I feel a sense of a real desire to have some involvement again, specifically in South Sudan and in Sub-Saharan Africa, I know that there are various things that God's been at work at in my life, and alongside others that I've met as well, that I know point to a future where there will be some of that involvement. It's just a matter of patience for what that is. So in a way that's been hard because, it's required, it's required patience for waiting for those future things. And it feels like, a lot of people that I know there, they're now 11 years older. People have had kids who were either very young then or not born yet, and now they're a decent chunk of their way through their schooling. And it's time flies really quick, so it's quite a crazy thing to reconcile. So that's probably been one of the harder things in some ways. I guess when you are prepared to when you get normalized, or you go through a period of being comfortable with living without comforts, or being prepared to make decisions that mean the sacrifice of comforts, that ends up playing out in other ways in your life by being prepared to make decisions that might be seen to be crazy by many. But it ends up in a boldness that I know in the long term glorifies God. There's certainly been even recently occasions where that's been the case. But yeah, I mean, out of hardships there is a real blessing, and there is a real opportunity there as well. I mean, yeah, or just other blessings, I guess, of having spent that time overseas that I have is, yeah, I mean, having the family that I do now, or having the wife that I do, most likely would not have happened. And so sometimes I reflect on that and think that it's a really neat way, a way that I'm really thankful that God has indirectly blessed me as a result of having gone and spent time overseas. I think probably the main thing would be, yeah, I mean, in going in, I had hoped that I would achieve, and probably expected that I'd achieve a lot more than I did. So I would go, yeah, and going back, I would probably have spent a bit more time focused on the relationship development, and go in with less of a sense of a burden to kind of get stuff done because people are, paying for me to be there. Even impacting only a few lives while there, or encouraging people that are there longer term, has an enormous value in of itself. And money at the end of the day is God's to do with as He pleases. So what better way could you be making use of someone's money than by following His call to take you to some other part of the world, whether it's you directly making a significant impact, or you indirectly making an impact in someone else's life who's then making quite a significant impact directly. So it's probably a changing of perspective would be probably one of the main things. I think, well, it starts with prayer. Praying through what it is that you feel passionate about, that God's having a clarity on what it is that God's calling you into specifically. Being able to help through your passions is a immense thing, and helps you get through moments where there's frustration or things feel like they are not going as planned. The other thing I would say is just not to be afraid of exploring the opportunity of that, or to worry about how it might set you back in your life. I know in going, I had a concern that I'm especially doing it straight after high school. You feel like I'm getting a year behind everyone else. All my mates are doing their first year of university. Most of them ended up changing their degree after the first year anyway, and only had a higher student debt to show for it. And just the level of maturing, the wisdom, just from a spiritual perspective, the blessing of having been and gone and been willing to sacrifice sort of your own life's development for a period of time. All those things immensely outweigh a year's worth of work or study, for example, if it's a year. So I think, not being afraid of what it might cost, because God will provide, and often provide in ways that you don't expect it, even long after the fact. And I'd say also don't be afraid of what it might cost, because if God's plan is for you to go there, then He'll provide the means for you to get there. And you might be quite surprised at actually who it is that will support you in going, and how people will respond, even those that don't know Jesus. Can often be quite a profound thing for many people, that someone would be prepared to give up what is considered to be normal life, in order to go and sacrifice a year of income earning or a year of, your time, or I keep using the reference of a year because it was a year for me, but however long it might be. I think don't be afraid to explore it. I think I'm just looking forward to seeing more people connected with a destination and in a profession or in a specific area that they're passionate about, making a difference in various parts of the world, and just having an opportunity to be able to hear even small bits of it indirectly through Chris and through my time on the board. I know that God's heart is for mission to see people saved, and that we're in a world with a lot of need, various types of need, and that he's not done with cross-cultural mission. So I'm looking forward to being a part of people's stories, even if it's in a small way. I look forward to coming across and talking with people that are exploring going on mission and actually going on mission as well. There's a part of mission that has not changed for a couple of millennia since we've been given the Great Commission. And there's obviously other parts that change with really which part of the world is a bastion of faith. I expect we'll be seeing more and more missionaries coming from those places that missionaries were being sent to, and I think it's certainly a challenge for the West, where we like to think of ourselves highly, and think we're such stable countries. Where you look at the corruption that can often occur, or the genocides even, or just brutality that can go on, and we look at our own countries and think, this doesn't happen here. But I think anyone that approaches or looks at those things with that sort of lens is very prone to pride, and actually we're going to, I think, quite possibly find that some of those beliefs get challenged. Might Pioneers New Zealand end up being a receiving? Possibly, quite possibly. And I think if that's the case, I'd be very welcoming of that. I'd be very open to that. And I think it would be hopefully quite a challenge and a wake-up call, really, to the church as a body in New Zealand. And perhaps as a church body in New Zealand, we do need a wake-up call that we have been seeking comfort rather than discomfort, and that as an extension perhaps has led to less people going because people want to stay here in comfort. It's my hope that that's not the case for Christendom in New Zealand, but that's perhaps a question we've got to be asking ourselves. Is God calling me somewhere? He's calling all of us to some form of mission. God's calling all of us to some form of mission, whether that's going overseas to Africa or to wherever. Obviously he's not calling every single person to head overseas, but some of us, yes, and all of us have the opportunity for mission locally as well. So for those of us, myself included, who at times spurn that calling of sharing the good news with people, it's a challenge, and I think that's something we all of us really should be looking at seriously. What does that mean for Pioneers New Zealand? Who knows? But I know I speak for the board that we're really seeking God, and what does the future look like, and how can we support people to go and be a part of God's story and the way that He's calling them to be.